Hey, the next speaker, gentleman with the same surname as myself. And yep, he is my brother. Brian and I have been partners in business for nearly 40 years. His input has always been at the highest level, as it really needed to be in the demanding and intense field of manufacturing. In this, the precious metals industry, Brian he's a tireless researcher, a person of incredible knowledge and credibility. He has used his knowledge of the manufacturing sector to connect some vital dots in his presentation today. Look, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome on stage the principal of As Good as Gold Australia, Mr. Brian Paynes.
Walking across that stage, I got a cool blast of air and it sort of shocked me. But I do talk on a number of subjects, and the subjects of today, and I'll be talking for 30 minutes and then there'll be a rest period. But the subjects of today, we're talking about leadership, central banking, and manufacturing in Australia. And when I say to leadership, it's all about how Darryl and myself conduct business with As Good as Gold Australia. I came across a gentleman, he's actually an American, and his forte was in finance and insurance, but from the Midwest of America. And his name was John F. Savage. You can YouTube him, and you'll find that he has some great quotes, and I'm going to read some of those quotes out to you. This is how, again, we run As Good as Gold Australia, or as close as possible. The road to excellence is always under construction. Work 8 hours and sleep 8 hours, just make sure they ain't the same 8. No success in the workplace makes up for a failure at home. A negative thought is a down payment on an obligation to fail. Shout praise and whisper criticism. To be successful, you must serve, not be served. Life is a series of adjustments. People who don't make mistakes always work for people who do. Before you speak, you should be sure it's going to improve on the silence. Success and money have nothing in common. If you do believe in yourself, if you don't believe in yourself, it's probably unanimous. Another leader out there, I've read so many of his books, and he's of the older generation. He's a little bit older than me. In fact, he's not on this earth today. But I'm talking about Winston Churchill. And we've heard the speakers tonight and the film clips there. A little bit, gee whiz, is it heading that way? So the next 3 little statements here are a little bit more light-hearted from Winston Churchill. Put a smile on your face. So at a dinner party, Winston Churchill met Bessie Braddock. She said, because Winston likes a drink or two, and she said to him toward the latter part of the evening, "Winston, sir, you are drunk." Churchill replied, "Madam, you are ugly. In the morning I shall be sober." Quite good. At another dinner party, Nancy Astor. Now, the Astor family, very wealthy in the UK and America. She said to Winston Churchill, "Sir, if you were my husband, I would give you poison." Churchill replied, "If I was your husband, I would take it." A quote from Winston Churchill, "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on." More seriously, from Winston Churchill, the whole history of the world is summed up in the fact that when nations are strong, they are not always just. And when they wish to be just, they are no longer strong. Margaret Thatcher, a great one from the UK. The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So true. Central banking. Darryl and I have no problem with bankers. Central bankers, I wave my hand and not to for an enjoyance moment. I don't think we need central banking. That's my personal opinion. The people that have been part of central banking in the past are these. Mayer Rothschild from the famous Rothschild family, 1744 to 1812. Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes the rules. J.P. Morgan from the J.P. Morgan Banking Group, 1837 to 1913. Gold is money, everything else is credit. Jim Rickards, the person we'll be listening to this afternoon. Here's what I know. Russia is buying hundreds of tons of gold. China is buying thousands. Americans couldn't care less. Someone's right and someone's wrong. And the last one from the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. But this is 20 years before he joined the US Federal Reserve. And Alan Greenspan said, and quote, "Gold and economic freedom are inseparable. In the absence of a gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. Gold stands as the protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the status antagonism towards a gold standard." So he was Federal Reserve Chairman for 19 years, from 1987 to 2006. But he wrote that before he went into the Federal Reserve. And I relate that sometimes to thinking about that to the Star Wars films. Anakin Skywalker, if you all remember, Anakin Skywalker went through to or became Darth Vader. And I think Alan Greenspan, I think he turned to the dark side as well. Okay. I'll get back to Mayer Rothschild in a short little while. Okay, central banking. The central banks right now in America, the US Federal Reserve is trying to reach 2% inflation. And the last report I heard, it was going down and not up, and it's now 1.3% inflation. But where does the money that they've printed, where has it gone? Why hasn't it caused inflation? Basically, all the trillions that they've printed over the last 10 years have gone to back up the banks. So make sure if there's a run on the banks have got the currency. The rest of the money has gone into the United States stock market, where the major companies are buying back their own stocks, their own shares, to build up their businesses and obviously the incomes of the 1% of the population. The printing of a US dollar is just increased the debt levels of the US government. More printing creates weakness. An analogy of that is that if you've got a large enough backyard and you might grow a fruit tree in there and you have a great season and you've got lots of fruit on that tree, unfortunately the buying price of that fruit will be cheaper that year. But if it doesn't produce anything, if it hasn't been printed, doesn't grow, this amount of fruit is smaller, and you'll be able to sell that fruit, the limited amount of supply you have got, at a much higher price. So the more they print, the less it becomes in value. In my pocket, and this is how I demonstrate when I sit down one-on-one to different people, I show them a US dollar reserve note. You won't be able to see it from there, but there's two different ones I have in my pocket. One is a silver certificate US reserve note. Unavailable today, you cannot take it to the bank and get any silver for it. But this is how it worked. You could go in with your silver and they would give you the piece of note to exchange. You could take that note back 10 years later and get your silver back. That's the silver certificate. That's how it worked. It also worked for a gold certificate as well at $20. But today we have a Federal Reserve note. You can take that. These were produced from 1913 when the Federal Reserve came about. And a Federal Reserve $1 bill would buy a week's worth of groceries. $1, a week's worth of groceries back in 1913. Today, a $1 bill, doesn't matter whether it's Australian or American, may not get you a quarter cup of coffee. That's how much it's gone down in value, as Darryl said before. It's lost 97%. But can that printing of money cure the problem of debt? And I'll let you know that it cannot. Because when you borrow money, let's put you in the position of the first client to go into the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. So it just opens up for business. You are the first customer. You are the first client to go to the Federal Reserve. You want to borrow the first dollar. So you go ahead and you borrow the first dollar. Nobody else has one. Remember, it's borrowed. So what happens when you borrow? You pay interest. So you are the first client, takes the first dollar. How do you pay the interest? You don't have any more. You have the only one. How do you pay the interest on the first dollar that you borrowed? Absolutely mathematically impossible. The answer is you have to borrow another one. So it doesn't matter whether it's $1, $1,000, $1 million, $10 million for a business. If you borrow $10 million and you want to sell that business 5 years later for a profit, of course, you don't want to make it for a loss, for a profit. Where does that extra 10 million come from? You may be able to pay personally your debt back, but the country can't. They have to keep on printing until it gets to a stage where it just blows up. No country today will ever be able to pay its debt back. Absolutely mathematically impossible. I didn't mean to press that button just then, but anyway, it was Jacob Rothschild. Jacob Rothschild is still the Rothschild family is still in their finance and banking today. And in 2016 this is what he wrote. The 6 months under review have seen central bankers continuing what is surely the greatest experiment in the monetary policy in the history of the world. We are therefore in uncharted waters, and it is impossible to predict the unintended consequences of very low interest rates, with some 30% of global debt at negative yields, combined with quantitative easing on a massive scale. He even said, we have increased, this is 2016, ladies and gentlemen, we have increased our exposure in gold and precious metals by 8% as of the end of June 2016. Quote, I even prefer the yellow metal over its main rival, the US dollar. Let me refer to this. The Rothschild family own 25% or roughly that of the US Federal Reserve. And he's saying he prefers the yellow metal over the US dollar. He prints a US dollar. He's buying gold and lots of it. JP Morgan, gold is money, everything else is credit. Let's go. Okay, there's your 6 months. I fell behind. That's all right. Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio runs Bridgewater Associates in the United States. It's the biggest hedge fund in the world. He's responsible for $200 billion of investments. He stated 2 months ago, not 20 years, 2 months ago, if you do have an excellent analysis of why you shouldn't have such an allocation to gold of between 5 and 10%, we'd appreciate you sharing it with us. So in other words, he's saying, I've looked far and wide, and I don't know any reason why you should not have 5 to 10% in your precious metals, in your savings, in your exposure to investments. Always keep 5 to 10% in precious metal. By the way, Ray Dalio is worth $17 billion. So he's obviously got 1.7 billion in gold and silver. Okay, now we're going to talk about manufacturing in Australia. As you know, we've seen the decimation of automotive manufacturing in general in Australia. I've come from a background of automotive engineering from when I had my apprenticeship, and Darryl, my partner, he started 4 years later. He had his apprenticeship at GM, and we had a booming business, and we took that business worldwide. But what's happened? Mitsubishi finished about 4 years ago. Ford Motor Company finished, closed up 12 months ago. General Motors and Toyota within the last couple of months. So what I'm going to show you here, how with the automotive industry and manufacturing altogether, but with the automotive industry, how a gold standard keeps the cost of the goods stable. So at this point of time, we could have a very vibrant automotive manufacturing business. Don't anybody, especially politicians, tell you otherwise. 1985, the average price of a Holden or a Ford would be $11,000. But in gold, if you see on the right-hand side, in gold, you've got 24 ounces. So it actually costs 24 ounces of gold or $11,000 to buy that 1985 motor car. We move forward about 30 years, 2012. As you can see, the car has gone up to 35,000, but in gold, 23 ounces, it's gone down. After nearly 30 years, it goes down in gold. But in currency, as you can see, it goes up. 2015, car's gone up a few more thousand, 39,000, and it goes up in gold 27. And gold had a bad year, bad couple of years, went up 3 ounces, 27 ounces of gold. Move a little bit forward. You can see from there, from 11 to 39, it's 235% increase in currency, in printed money. In gold, 11%. A far, far difference in the equation. Let's go forward. And we're actually going back. 1908, Model T Ford comes onto the market. They produce 100,000 vehicles. That vehicle is sold at $365 in 1908 at a cost price in gold of 18 ounces. So 18 ounces of gold bought you $365 vehicle. 2016, that price vehicle, it goes from $365 to $40,000. And look at that. 23 ounces of gold. So in 110 years approximately, you've got $40,000 motor car, but 23 ounces of gold, and it started off at 24. It's very, very stable under a gold standard. Gold standards are good for a country, not bad for a country. It can be moved. It doesn't matter. You may not. We can move currencies today with cryptos or by pressing a tablet button on your computer. But that doesn't stop a gold standard either, because you can have a gold-backed currency, you can do exactly the same. How about the increase, ladies and gentlemen? 10,500% in currency. In gold, 35% over 110 years, 0.3 of 1% per year. 10,500, that is your difference. That is why our automotive industry could not compete because the manipulation of currencies worldwide did not allow Australia to compete. But have a look, from the Model T Ford, even really you don't even start from Model T Ford, 1985. 1985, we're still producing motor cars, and 235%, but what was in a motor car? We improved it by ABS brakes, traction control, side and front airbags, hands-free Bluetooth, digital radios, alloy wheels, air conditioning, rear window heating, power windows, CD players, USB controls, satellite navigation. We have it all. We just didn't have the right currency. I'll leave you with my quote. I've given you quotes of all the other famous speakers. I hope one day that I'm young enough to know and hear, but this is my quote. Gold and silver equals economic freedom. Our present monetary system is the greatest perpetual loss-making mathematical system ever invented. It has produced the largest Ponzi scheme that has given untold riches for the 1% and a massive debt to the others. It is a debt that can never be repaid. Only the classical gold standard can reverse these dire circumstances that we are all in. Thank you very much.